While I was at my desk, absorbed in the spreadsheets on my laptop, my mind drifted until my phone suddenly rang. My father's name flickered on the screen, causing a familiar discomfort. "Hey, Dad," I greeted, but was met with silence. Initially, I assumed a bad connection until I heard a chair scrape across the floor, a sigh, and then his voice, harsh and cutting. "She's a failure. She'll never succeed." My stomach twisted, and I remained frozen, the phone still at my ear. My mother's softer, yet just as biting voice chimed in. "Come on, Greg. She's doing fine. Doesn't she pay the mortgage?" My father scoffed dismissively. "That's the least she can do after all we've done for her. Do you think I'm proud of her? She was a mistake, a constant disappointment. She thinks she's successful, but she's nothing more than a joke." The hurtful words cut through me, leaving my mouth dry and my grip on the phone tight. I was immobile, unable to breathe or react. "She's lucky we even let her be part of this family," my father continued with disdain. The realization dawned on me. This call was accidental, an unintentional revelation of their true feelings. The silence after the call ended was deafening. My heart raced, threatening to burst through my chest. I sat there, motionless, for what felt like eternity. For the past 6 years, I had discreetly paid their mortgage. They believed they were making payments to the bank, but it was I who ensured a roof over their heads through JSC Holdings, the investment firm I founded with the help of my financial advisor. I had purchased their mortgage when they were on the brink of losing the house. They never read the fine print, never knew, never cared it was my generosity. I spent my life yearning for my father's approval, striving higher in my career, earning more than he ever did, yet it was never enough. This realization marked the turning point. I exhaled, steadying myself as I opened my laptop, reviewing their mortgage agreements, payment schedules, and ownership documents. My father saw me as a failure, but he was about to realize who had been supporting them all these years. In 1 week, he'd receive a surprise of a lifetime. Sleep eluded me that night, my father's harsh words echoing in my mind like a broken record. He said it with a cold certainty, as if my existence was merely an inconvenience. I should have been accustomed to it, as my father was never one to offer praise. Straight as were met with indifference, promotions expected, buying my first home was considered frivolous. Every achievement was disregarded or criticized. Yet, I held on to a fragile hope that perhaps hard work would change his mind. That hope was shattered with this overheard call. By morning, I was done feeling anything. I got out of bed, made a cup of black coffee, and settled in at my desk. The glow of my laptop screen reflecting in my weary eyes as I opened the folder labeled JSC Holdings Property Number 12, my parents' house. The mortgage they believed they were paying resided under my name. Years ago, the bank had transferred it to JSC Holdings just months before foreclosure. Back then, my mother called, pleading for help. My father, too proud, refused to ask, yet I intervened anyway. I established a seamless arrangement. They thought the payments went to the bank, but in truth, each check came to my LLC. Of course, I covered most costs, 6 years paying thousands monthly for their comfort, never expecting thanks, just basic decency. As I reviewed the fine print, I recalled setting a purchase option clause for protection if circumstances turned. My financial advisor, Mark, had insisted on it, though I laughed then, not imagining what could go wrong. Now, the laughter faded. JSC Holdings held the right for full ownership upon any missed payment. My parents would transition to month-to-month tenants, and failing rent payments could lead to eviction under state law. They were oblivious to how much power I wielded. I leaned back, letting the gravity of it settle over me. My father viewed me as a failure, but this entire time, it was my roof they lived under, my support sustaining them. The hint of a smile appeared on my lips. I possessed the power to strip everything away from them, but the real question was whether they truly deserved it. Just then, my phone buzzed as if on cue. "Mom." "Hey, sweetheart, can you come over for dinner this Sunday? We'd love to see you." I stared at her message. The last time she invited me over, it had been a ploy to ask for money. I considered ignoring her, Yet something urged me to go along with it. If my father could fake affection, so could I. So I replied, "Me, of course." Looking forward to it. A strategic lie. Before shutting down my laptop, I had one last thing to do. Reach out to Uncle Ray, my dad's older brother, always on my side. The only family member who acted as if I mattered. I texted him. Me. "Hey Uncle Ray, I need to ask you something. Has Dad ever said anything strange about me?" His response was almost instant. "Uncle Ray, Jessica, we need to talk. It's worse than you think." My chest tightened. Worse? What had they been saying? The phone rang, and I answered immediately. "Uncle Ray?" He sighed heavily. "Jessica, I've stayed silent for too long, but after what I overheard last week, I can't anymore." I braced myself and asked, "What did they say?" After a pause, he replied, "They don't just gossip behind your back. They've laid plans. Your dad, he's scrutinizing your finances. He thinks you're hiding money from them. Last week, he told your mother that they'll force your hand if you don't voluntarily share more cash." I felt a sharp anger settle in my stomach. "Force my hand, how?" Uncle Ray continued. "He mentioned maybe calling your employer to discredit you, or contacting the IRS to audit you." My breath slowed as I absorbed it all. They were beyond ungrateful, malicious, willing to destroy me for money. "Uncle Ray, I need you to do something for me," I said, calm but firm. "Anything, sweetheart." "I need proof," I stated. While I didn't know their entire plan, one thing was sure. They thought I was weak. They didn't know who they were dealing with. In a few days, they'd understand just how wrong they were. For the next 2 days, I prepared. If my father wanted to play dirty, I'd show him what underestimating me could mean. First, I called Mark, my financial advisor. "Jessica," he greeted warmly. "This isn't just a social call, is it?" "Not exactly," I responded, tapping my pen on the desk. "I need to check how airtight our agreement is on property number 12. If they miss a payment, how quickly can I act?" Mark didn't hesitate. "Immediately. The purchase option clause lets JSC Holdings take full ownership the second they default. They'd have no legal recourse unless they can magically produce $350,000 to buy you out." I smirked. "They can't." "Then they're screwed," I concluded, exhaling slowly, savoring the control. "Good," I said. "Also, monitor their account. I suspect they're already struggling, and I need confirmation their next payment will bounce." Mark chuckled. "That won't take long. Their balance is alarmingly low. Unless they conjure up $5,800 by the 15th, they're finished." I checked the calendar. That was in 4 days. 4 days until my father, the man who considered me a failure, would face the reality of living on my generosity. For days until he'd have to plead for help. Help I had no intention of offering. On Sunday, I drove to my parents' house, maintaining an air of normalcy. Seeing their home, a property I owned, brought a peculiar detachment. This place, once my sanctuary, was now enemy territory. As I walked up the driveway, my mother opened the door, face brightening. "Jessica, sweetheart, come on in." Her excitement was feigned. I recognized it now. I entered, enveloped by the smell of garlic and roast chicken. My father sat at the table's head, arms crossed, face unreadable. My mother busied herself setting dishes like a perfect dinner could soften whatever they intended to ask. My brother, Liam, leaned arrogantly back. Unlike me, he never craved our father's approval. The golden child with 0 achievements, yet he'd never been deemed a failure. I took my seat, my expression neutral. "Jessica," my father ventured, his voice laden with forced warmth. "It's good to see you." I nodded. "You too, Dad." An uncomfortable silence hung before my mother interjected, her voice sweet as syrup. "We've been thinking a lot about family." She reached for my hand. "How crucial it is to support each other in tough times." I stayed expressionless. "That's true." My father exhaled, putting on an air of difficulty, as if he alone bore the burden. "Jessica, we need your assistance." A strained mortgage payment, default loomed, yet he minimized it. "How much do you need?" I inquired, feigning oblivion. My mother hesitated. We were hoping for an extra $3,000 a month. Setting down my fork, I tilted my head slightly. It was a lot of money, $5,800 every month, and they wanted to add another $33,000 on top of it. I refrained from laughing. My father snapped, irritation seeping through his facade. It's nothing compared to what we've done for you. We raised you, gave you everything. The least you can do is support your family. I met his gaze, feeling my blood turn cold. The least I could do, after all the times they'd belittled me behind my back? The same father who labeled me a failure while living in my house? Taking a slow sip of water, I maintained a calm expression. I'll think about it, I replied. My mother sighed with relief. Oh, sweetheart, thank you. We knew we could rely on you. I forced a smile, even though I knew they'd lose everything in just 3 days. That night, Mark called to inform me they defaulted. A wave of satisfaction washed over me. They what? I asked, feigning surprise. They didn't make the mortgage payment, Mark repeated. From midnight, JSC Holdings owned the house outright. I closed my eyes, exhaling slowly. My father, the man who had looked down on me, was now my tenant. Do you want to start the eviction process? Mark asked. Not yet, I responded, curious about how long it would take for them to face reality. Smiling, I glanced at an old family photo on my desk, dating back to when I still believed in my father's capacity for love. Not yet, I murmured, wanting to see how long it would take for them to crumble. They would break, and this time I wouldn't catch them. 3 days later, the silence from my parents was a testament. No calls, no texts, no guilt-laden messages about family solidarity. They hadn't realized it yet. They still believed their payment had gone through, unaware their home was no longer theirs. At precisely 9:07 a.m. on Friday, I received a notification in my inbox. Subject: URG Default Notice, Property Number 12 from JSC Holdings Legal Department. My heart raced with mingled anticipation and satisfaction as I opened the email. The legal notice was cold, formal, and undeniable. Due to failure to make the mortgage payment by the 15th, the purchase option clause had been exercised. Effective immediately, JSC Holdings was the property's sole owner, as per contractual agreements. The current occupants would be considered month-to-month tenants under rental agreements. Failure to adhere to rental terms might lead to eviction proceedings. Fingers hovering over the keyboard, I realized the power was now in my hands. I didn't rush to call them. They called me first. At 9:42 a.m., a call from Mom went to voicemail. At 9:47 a.m., she tried again, and at 9:50 a.m., my father called. I let them stew for an hour before finally answering. Jessica, my mother's voice was frantic. There's been a bank error. We got a notice saying we've defaulted. But that can't be right. You have to help us. Leaning back in my chair, a slow smile lined my face. It's not a mistake, I said. Silence followed. What? My mother whispered. I said it's not a mistake. I repeated, enunciating each word. You didn't pay your mortgage. The house, it's not yours anymore. A stunned pause ensued. Jessica, sweetheart, what are you talking about? My mother let out a nervous laugh, as if it were a joke. This is our house, she insisted. No, Mom, I corrected. It was your house. The moment you defaulted, JSC Holdings assumed full ownership. Legally, you're now tenants. The weight of my words settled in. No, that's impossible. My father's voice cracked with panic. The mortgage is with the bank. We've been paying it for years. I let that hang in the air, then delivered the final revelation. You weren't paying the bank, Dad. You were paying me. Silence resounded. Then, you're lying, my father accused, but fear underlined his words. No, I'm not. I sighed. 6 years ago, when you almost lost this house, I bought the mortgage. You've been sending payments to JSC Holdings, believing it was a bank. But it's my company. I own this house. I always have. My mother gasped, my father swore softly, and then my brother, Liam, who must have been eavesdropping, laughed. We've been paying rent to our own failure, Of a sister this whole time? No wonder the bank's a mess. You probably messed up the paperwork like you mess up everything else, he scoffed. Clenching my jaw, I forced myself to remain calm. Liam always acted this way. Arrogant, cruel, entitled. Well, since you believe I mess everything up, I retorted smoothly. You'll love this part. Rent is due in 30 days, and if you can't pay, you're getting evicted. Jessica, wait. My mother started, but my father cut her off. This is a bluff. You wouldn't treat your own family like this, he asserted sharply. I chuckled briefly, wouldn't I? I reminisced about the countless years spent covering for them, the exorbitant sums I spent to ensure their comfort, while they disparaged me behind my back. I recalled my father's voice during that call, labeled as a mistake that never should have occurred. They're scheming to blackmail me, ruin my career, and rob me if I failed to provide more funds lingered in my mind. My father always underestimated my resolve. He was on the verge of discovery. I've consulted my attorney, I replied serenely. Should you refuse to pay, you're evicted, and any attempts at manipulation, threats, or property damage will result in me pressing charges. You ungrateful little. I disconnected the call before he could complete his rant. Within moments, my phone erupted with messages. Mom, Jessica, don't do it. We're family, let's discuss. Dad, you'll rue this decision, mark my words. Liam, you consider yourself clever, merely a bitter, pathetic loser. Watch us reclaim the house. I skimmed each message, then blocked their contacts. A lifetime exerted in appeasing them was over. I leaned back, observing the scenery through the window, feeling the liberation as, for the first time in years, they no longer leaned on me. They would have to stand independently, and if they falter, it's no longer my burden. Days passed in unusual silence, no calls, no pleading messages. I half expected my mother at my doorstep, tearfully seeking forgiveness, my father's fury and coercion to reverse my stance, or my brother devising some loophole. But there was only silence. I grasped their strategy, silently plotting their next scheme. 3 days thereafter, on a Wednesday morning at work, an unknown number called. I ignored it. Soon after, another, then an email titled urgent. Home foreclosure mistake from law offices unfolded. Dear Miss Carter, we've been approached by your parents, Greg and Linda Carter, regarding a perceived misunderstanding concerning their home's foreclosure, wishing to discuss potential reinstatement. Kindly reach out at your earliest to avoid further legal issues. Regards, John R. Hastings, ESQ. I closed it, amused at their lawyer hiring. I forwarded it to Mark, my financial advisor. Within 10 minutes, he rang back, laughing. They lack a case, having signed the mortgage, the purchase option clause, everything. They can't win legally. You're safeguarded. I sighed, reassured yet unsurprised. Still, they'd persist. Mark chuckled, probably, but their options are exhausted. I mused about my father's arrogance, his preference to obliterate rather than concede. They'd push until nothing remained. That evening, as I concluded dinner, my phone rang. Uncle Ray. Hey, Uncle Ray, I greeted. No preliminaries. His voice was grave. I just spoke with your father. Be cautious. What's going on? He aims beyond legalities. That chill hit my core. How so? He's attempting to jeopardize your employment. Horror filled me. He said it explicitly, if you won't relinquish the house, he'll destroy you another way. He mentioned contacting HR with fake grievances, fraud accusations, anything that could dislodge you. I inhaled deeply. I shut. Of course he would. Confronted with failure, he'd rather incinerate everything than concede. My battle wasn't just for the house, but for me. I wasn't waiting. The next morning, I headed to HR. Jessica, my supervisor Lauren, welcomed me with warmth. What's up? Forcing a faint smile, I said, we need a private talk. Quietly, she ushered me into her office. I confessed, my father seeks my termination. Her surprise visible, she asked what? I unfolded the narrative of mortgages, defaults, threats. After hearing the entire account, she exhaled, shaking her head. Jessica, let me assure you, your position is secure. Relief, overwhelming. She continued, incidents like these aren't unusual. grudges, family disputes, untrue reports. If he contacts us, we'll document it rigorously and assuredly. He lacks the influence here. She offered a reassuring smile. We'll alert legal to be prepared. Any overstep, we'll reciprocate with a cease and desist. Exhaling, tension I hadn't realized dissipated. That night, I felt a weight lift off me, realizing my father's control had slipped away just like the house he had lost. A sharp knock roused me, and I knew who it would be. Opening the door, I found my parents on the other side. My father, rigid and furious, and my mother, eyes red and swollen from crying. "Jessica," she whispered, "please." I crossed my arms. "What do you want?" My father replied, voice low and menacing. "We need the house back. You have no right to do this." I tilted my head unfazed. I have every right, legally, financially, morally. Desperation tinted my mother's voice. "We raised you, gave you everything, and now you're punishing us?" I interjected. "For what? For calling me a failure? For saying I was a mistake? For trying to destroy my life once the money stopped?" She recoiled, and my father's jaw tightened. "You're being cruel." I chuckled without humor. "No, Dad, I am being fair." A tense silence stretched between us. His eyes darkened, a sneer forming. "You'll regret this, Jessica. You think you've won, but you'll realize you need us." A clarity settled within me, dispelling the last vestige of hope I had for him changing. I met his gaze directly. "Then we'll see." I closed the door, knowing I was freeing myself from their grip entirely. Standing there, hand on the doorknob, heart racing, I understood that nothing I ever did would make me enough for them, and I no longer needed it to. The next morning, I sent them a final notice. Subject: Notice to vacate property number 12 from JSC Holdings Legal Department. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Carter, as previously notified, the mortgage for the 2nd Street property is no longer active due to non-payment. As of today, your tenancy is terminated. Vacate within 30 days or face eviction. Remove personal belongings by the deadline to avoid legal issues. Sincerely, Jessica Carter, owner JSC Holdings. I lingered over the email before hitting send. They were out of my life and the fallout began. My mother called repeatedly, left messages, but I didn't respond. My father left a voicemail. "You'll regret this one day, Jessica. You'll come back and we won't be here." I listened, then deleted it. Liam, my brother, tried once more. "Congrats, Jessica. You just ruined our family. I hope you're happy." No reply from me. Years they had convinced me I was the problem. Never enough, a burden. But now they were without a home, and I was finally free. 30 days came and went. I avoided the house, offered no assistance. Mark confirmed they vacated promptly, likely to avoid the embarrassment of eviction. The house remained mostly untouched, but they took what they could, leaving garbage behind. Typical. I visited one final time, finding it empty, the house I once loved now mine alone. Yet standing there, I felt no sadness, guilt, or nostalgia. Only relief. Calling Uncle Ray, I announced they're gone. He asked how I felt. I paused, then smiled. Lighter. 2 weeks later, I sold the house, the market being favorable, and quickly invested the profits into a fund for women escaping financially abusive families, women like me, made to believe they owed their families everything just to exist. I had learned true family isn't dictated by blood, but by who stands by you. 3 months later, an email from my mother arrived. "Jessica, please, I don't know where else to go. Can we talk?" Once, I would have agonized, questioned my decisions, wondered if I was cruel or harsh. Now, I simply deleted it. Some bridges, once burned, are best left that way.